Good evening and welcome to this evening's study session. Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes one study session item. Seeing there are no concept reviews on the agenda this evening, there will not be any public comment. You can watch the study session live on Channel 8 and through live streaming on broomfield.org/council meetings. For our hard of hearing residents present, we have wireless headsets available through our AV team in the back of the council chambers. This evening, staff will be presenting on several updates related to the 2024 focus session, including holding a study session discussion this evening on immigration migrant support as directed by council at the 2024 focus session. Staff will ask for direction from council for a 2025 focus session and the community survey. Due to the nature of this conversation and the direction needed from staff on different topics, staff will present item by item with corresponding council discussion after each item. Starting with number one, self-sufficient wage, minimum living wage. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to summarize, starting with a short background on the 2024 focus session and then self-sufficient minimum living wage.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council and community. Danae Brouillard, our Director of Strategic Initiatives, is going to walk us through this item and field additional questions, as the mayor said, item by item. Ms. Brouillard.
Thank you, Manager Hoffman. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. Danae Brouillard. And this evening, I'll be walking you through the presentation, which includes several items. The work that has been accomplished and the work that is still to come takes several staff members, and many of them are in the audience in the back of the room. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge their efforts and thank them for being here to help answer questions as we move through tonight's agenda. As the mayor mentioned, the presentation will start with the minimum wage conversation. But before diving in, I did want to take a moment to summarize how we got to the conversation this evening. Earlier this year on March 1st and 2nd, City Council led a day-and-a-half focus session. The agenda for the 2024 focus session was different than in past years in the way that council members set the agenda and provided the presentations. The staff role was limited to answering questions and taking directions for follow-up. During this time, council directed staff to take action on 4 of the five agenda items that were discussed. We will walk through each of these action items this evening and provide a status update. Additionally, as the mayor mentioned, the presentation this evening will also serve as a study session discussion related to the immigrant and migrant support topic and the direction provided by council, which I will dive into more later. Next slide. All right, the first item from the 2024 focus session for discussion this evening is a follow-up to council's direction related to self-sufficiency or minimum wages. Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf presented this item, and council directed staff to explore developing a request for proposals or an RFP for market and economic analysis related to minimum wage, and to explore what other surrounding communities are currently doing in this space. Since the direction provided in March, staff has explored joining efforts with Adams County, as well as Boulder County in their studies and their RFP process. However, based on conversations with these communities and their respective RFPs, their scope of service, timeline, and the characteristics of the study, it was determined that we needed to do our own, and we opted to go that direction and have contracted AECOM for these efforts. At the February 18th, 2025 study session, staff will complete this action item by providing a comprehensive update on the AECOM study's findings and observations and the current status of studies and efforts that are happening in our neighboring cities and communities. If further direction is desired by council, it would be appropriate for council to provide that direction at the February 18th study session meeting. And with that, I'll pass it back to the mayor for council questions specific to this item.
Thank you very much for that recap, Ms. Brouillard. Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf, as the requester of self-sufficient minimum living wage as part of our focus session, would you like to speak to this item first?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So the move to create a local minimum wage really follows the 2019 Colorado law that gave cities and the authority to set their own wages. Back in 2019 and 2020, the Boulder County Consortium of Cities, which Broomfield was a member, began these conversations. Longmont, Lafayette, Louisville, and Erie continued to discuss a coordinated approach. At that time, Broomfield was not furthering those conversations with those communities. This last year, we saw that the Boulder County moved forward with the implementation of a local minimum wage in the unincorporated areas of Boulder County. The city of Boulder did move forward with a local minimum wage this last year. Adams County, I believe, was having a conversation about whether or not to move forward, and I do not believe that they've moved forward at this time. But the city of Boulder did produce a study, and they did do community outreach in terms of the conversation around this. There were some interesting pieces that they found. The municipality surveyed 993 workers and commissioned a study. The study was released this last summer. It found that minimum wage workers in the region tend to be younger. They tend to be female and disproportionately Latino, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That the jobs in retail, food service, childcare, agriculture, and arts and recreation are among the lowest paying in Boulder County. The report does not estimate how many workers in Boulder County earn that minimum wage, but roughly 10% of the county's workers earn less than $15 according to the report. So I believe that as we continue to move forward, we will find this information that not only is good for the local minimum wage conversation, but also our economic development here in Broomfield, and realizing those the employee and workforce trends that exist within Broomfield and outside of Broomfield. So that's all I have, Mayor, for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. Does any other member of council have any questions or comments? Sound like a plan to everybody? Councilmember Henkel.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciated this conversation back in March, and I appreciate the leadership on this. This is something that the Metro Area County Commissioners have looked at as well. And I just want to make sure that we're including our business community. It sounded like I talked with the Chamber of Commerce. They are going to likely do some sort of survey next year, and that could likely be part of that conversation. So I would love for our staff to communicate with the chamber and make sure that they have everything that they need from us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Marsh Holston.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would agree with what Councilmember Henkel just said. I do support exploring this. I do worry that if we do it by ourselves and not in a broader context with our neighbors, it's less effective. But I would definitely like to see the Chamber of Commerce engaged on the topic as much as possible as we move forward for the process. So thank you.
Oh, yeah. Just to add, I know that Adams County is in between what Boulder's already done and what we're about to do. They're in the stakeholder process. So they started theirs, I want to say, earlier in the year with surveys and outreach to the community. And I'm quite certain we'll be including all those same stakeholders in our outreach as well. So they're just a little bit ahead of us in terms of the outreach. I don't know if I don't think they've made any decisions yet. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to jump in and lend my complete support behind this. I think that words are cheap and cash is actually a real thing. And if we actually believe in supporting working class people, this is something we absolutely have to move ahead with. So this has my full support. I'd also like to point out that one of the best things you can do to stimulate the economy is give people who have the least a little bit more money. And so I think it will be quite the boon for all of us. And again, I fully support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council member questions, feedback? Not seeing any. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Bouillard. We'll move on to the next one. Best value contracting.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Holston. Before diving into the direction provided by Arch, best value contracting is a procurement process that allows organizations to consider elect the more expensive proposal received. This is defined as best value contracting, and it is the Procurement Council. It is not, the conversation coming forward is not related to best value contracting, but instead it refers to a methodology called values-based procurement, or VBP. You're going to see all over the place. Values-based procurement is an approach that emphasizes selecting suppliers and contractors based on shared values, ethical standards, and broader social, environmental, and cultural impacts, rather than just cost efficiency or financial outcomes. At the focus session, some examples of these values that were discussed by council included livable wages, sustainability, and ties or connections to Broomfield. To accurately capture the direction provided by council, staff will start using the term value-based procurement moving forward, just to make sure that we are all speaking the same language and talking about the same thing. Following that conversation at the focus session, council directed staff to prepare a study session for council's consideration related to this values-based procurement model, and to also provide information related to efforts and approaches used by neighboring communities. Staff has been busy researching this topic and will present an update to the council at the February 18th, 2025 study session. And that presentation will include information on the current procurement process, which, as I mentioned earlier, is best value contracting, and the pros and cons of incorporating a values-based model instead. If further direction is desired by council, it would be appropriate for council to provide that direction to staff at the February 18th, 2025 council meeting. And with that, I'll pass it back to the mayor for council questions to this item.
Thank you again, Ms. Brouillard. Councilmember Marshall, as the requester of this item as part of the focus session, would you like to speak to this item first?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I do believe that this goes along with our values as a community of really looking out for our people. It goes with the conversation, the previous conversation on minimum wage. We really want to ensure that one of the things, my idea is that the companies that we're hiring really do bring the best value to our community as far as the wages that they pay, the way they treat their employees. And actually, if some of you have noted in the ongoing social media conversation on our trash hauler conversation, one thing that's come up several times is that whether or not we picked a hauler that was local versus national. So I think that is something that, if in the values-based procurement model, if we could possibly give weight to local companies and especially our local small businesses, I think that is something that is really good for our community. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any member of council have any questions or feedback on this item? Councilmember Leslie.
Thank you. I've worked under all three of these different models, and I've seen large corporations, companies like Motorola do this, where the vendors and suppliers align themselves with the values and the vision of the company. And again, it reinforces the overall objective, not just of the company itself or the organization itself, but all those who participate in supplying and serving that company. So I think it's a model we should take seriously. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Lim.
Wanted to make sure that the connection to the local business community, if it's a local business, if it's a regional business, or if it's a state business, does that fit into the criteria that we will be looking at in this discussion? Because you mentioned it briefly in what you referred to, but it was not on the slide. So is that part of that VBP discussion?
Looking at Manager Hoffman, our finance team is at their annual finance conference and not here this evening. So Councilmember Lim, if I can, I'd like to follow up with the finance team so I don't overpromise and follow up with council on what will be included. I think they're planning on bringing forward different ideas and then to get further direction from council on what they would want to be included. But I will clarify that and follow up.
Okay,
Councilmember Lim, may I ask to clarify the question that you just asked? So I'm not clear on what we're clarifying.
Well, on the slide, it listed things that were more social, the benefits to the workers, the benefits to culture. There we go. Ethical standards, environmental, cultural impacts. Would this value-based procurement include a look at whether it's a local small business, whether it's a regional business, whether it's a state of Colorado business? Or
Yes.
not? Yes.
Yes, it would. And so I think the best clarification, and staff learned this as we were looking at both of those models, value, the way that we've been doing value procurement is value equals dollars. Value on the value-based is all of those categories that were just mentioned. So the fact that they weren't specified on the slide, it really is all encompassing with those values and what that weighted model looks like, with the dollar value being weighted less heavily than the values that we would be looking at.
Okay, thank you. That's good.
Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf, did you want to speak?
That'd be great, Mayor. My screen went completely like.
That's okay.
So for the values-based procurement study session that we would have this next year, the thing that I would like to see is if we were to add this this kind of new weighted element within this process, I would want to see kind of what that weight, how much weight that held, and how that kind of changed the, I guess, the weights of all of the process as a whole. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but just wanting to make, I want to find out more of, how significant is this going to be weighted into that process?
When staff comes back, we don't plan on coming back with recommendations for a repeatable model on the methodology. It's more about what categories and to what degree you want included. So it'd be an additional, I think the best way to do that, Mayor Pro Tem, would be to take our, say, last 3 CIP projects and apply the way we have done it historically and what it could look like if we applied those additional value categories.
I think that would be great.
Okay.
I like that a lot. Thank
All right.
you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? Donna, and if not, staff will proceed with the next item related to community air quality monitoring.
Thank you, Mayor. As you mentioned, the next item this evening is related to Councilmember Anderson and Lim's request at the focus session regarding community air monitoring. At the focus session, council directed staff to continue the Ajax and CSU contract program for 2024 with modifications to the public dashboard. Council also directed staff to contract with Boulder Air for the remainder of 2024. This was completed when council approved the Boulder Air contract at the April 23rd, 2024 council meeting, and the services went into effect on May 1st of this year. Although the action items have been addressed related to the subject, we just wanted to provide council a quick update to let them know that the 2025 contracts are on the consent agenda for the December 3rd meeting currently. And what is being proposed is that the contracts for 2025 maintain the same network operations, reporting services, and public portals as the current network for both Ajax and CSU, as well as Boulder Air for 2025. I'll pass it back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Brouillard. Do any members of council have any questions or comments on this item? All right, moving on. That was quick. Next is rental registration, and at the focus session, council discussed this and provided direction to staff that no further action be taken and no follow-up is needed. So we're not going to be addressing that tonight. Next is immigration migrant support. Therefore, we'll move to this item. Council member, go ahead, Ms. Brouillard.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Perfect. All right. As the mayor mentioned, the next topic is immigration and migrant support from the focus session, which was requested by Councilmember Hinkle. At the 2024 focus session, Councilmember Hinkle provided a presentation related to immigration and migrant support in Broomfield. At the conclusion of the presentation and discussion, the direction to staff from council was to prepare a study session regarding the city and county of Broomfield becoming a certified welcoming city through Welcoming America and the anticipated need for staffing and funding related to these efforts. Staff has researched the certification program and will provide council this evening with additional information and the preliminary estimate of costs and staffing needs to pursue the certification. At the end of the presentation, we're looking for direction from council on whether or not further action is desired by council. Next slide. All right, one more slide, please. So what is a certified welcoming city? As Councilmember Hinkle shared in her presentation at the focus session, certified welcoming is an assessment and certification process for local governments offered by Welcoming America. Certified welcoming was launched in 2017, and they revamped the certification process in 2020, developing the welcoming standard, which includes 7 framework areas and a 1 to 5-star designation process. The purpose of the 1 to 5-star designation is to provide communities a roadmap to build upon their work as they move through the various star designations. This is a process still used today for certification, and as of 2024, there are 25 certified welcoming communities across the entire United States. Next slide. To apply and be considered for certification, a local government must first determine readiness, which involves conducting a landscape analysis with community partners and stakeholders involved in local welcoming and inclusion work. Local governments also need to determine which level of STAR designation is appropriate based on current efforts. In preparation for the study session, we completed the survey, and it was determined that Broomfield would be positioned to apply for a 2-star designation based off of our current programs. Once it has been determined that a local government is ready to apply for certification, they submit an application, a $12,000 application fee, supplemental information, which would include the pre-assessment and the landscape analysis. Welcoming America would then formally evaluate and assess the community's efforts to provide inclusive environments for immigrants and refugees based on the welcoming standard, which I'm going to talk more about in a moment. Pending the results of the audit, the local government is given a report with action items that need to be addressed to be certified, or certification is awarded. Once certified, a local government must continue to meet the indicators in the welcoming standard and reapply every 4 years to keep that certification. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, Welcoming America completes an audit on applicants using their welcoming standard, which includes 7 framework or outcome areas. I'm going to walk through each of these areas and then provide some examples, not all, but some of the examples that Broomfield is working on currently. Next slide. Before diving in, I just wanted to take a moment and set the stage for the conversation this evening. Since 2020, this is one of the fun parts about doing research, is you realize how amazing work has been done so quickly. So since 2020, so within the last 3 to 4 years, Broomfield has implemented a community goal focused on creating thriving, diverse, and welcoming community. There are several goals, strategies, and tactics that the organization is working on daily to move the needle in this space, many of which relate to this framework. In addition to the community goal, Broomfield also implemented an equity statement, which is on the slide. I'll just take a moment because I know it's a lot of text for people to read. This statement reaffirms Broomfield's commitment as an organization to being inclusive for all, and reflecting that in the way we create programs, services, and policies. Next slide. So now to get into the framework, which I mentioned there are 7 areas. The first framework area of the welcoming standard is civic engagement, which is a commitment from communities to ensure that all residents, including immigrants, can fully participate in civic life and duties. Broomfield remains committed to this work through intentional and accessible marketing and outreach efforts for all backgrounds, and includes opportunities for individuals to receive additional assistance if needed. Additionally, council meetings are open to all. Some specific examples that Broomfield has implemented to increase access to civic engagement include Language Line, which is a translation service that provides access to interpreters in over 240 languages. Additionally, Broomfield Public Health and Environment launched the first cohort of the Health Ambassador Program coming out of the pandemic. The program aims to reduce health inequities in our community by partnering with those most impacted by health issues. It is a model that utilizes people that have relationships with communities to share the information and to meet people where they're at. We have 9 ambassadors currently. It's a mix of individuals and organizations, and they are helping us with this important work and represent racial and ethnic communities, monolingual Spanish speakers, people experiencing homelessness, and low-income families and children. This program has helped people access vaccines, provide substance misuse prevention, mental health resources, and linked residents up with care. Next slide. The second framework area is connected communities, which means local governments build connections and trust between residents, creating opportunities and spaces for all. The program that I just talked about, the Health Ambassador Program, is a great example of work in this space as they're going out in the communities, working with those most impacted, and doing the first step in this meaningful work, which is building the relationship and trust. In addition to these efforts, Broomfield works to build and strengthen relationships with community partners to create opportunities for all residents, including immigrants. A recent example was the Broomfield Out Loud event, a multi-year project empowering the Broomfield community through storytelling and art. Broomfield Out Loud will continue this summer through summer 2025 on 4 stages, and I encourage you all to attend. It's a really incredible thing. Another example that we are proud to share with council and the community this evening is the efforts of the Departmental Equity Work Group, which is a compilation of several departments to whom this work is important. They are currently working to create the first Broomfield Language Access Plan. This plan would provide an organizational philosophy that includes best practices and standards that Broomfield can use to be more consistent, collaborative, and engaging. As mentioned earlier, building relationships with underserved populations and ensuring that our message for specific programs and services reaches those who may need it most is a critical part of the work. Our DEI team has forged relationships with property management organizations at our mobile home parks and apartment buildings to hand deliver information pamphlets and flyers for education. And we continue to explore innovative ways to continue to improve these efforts in the future. Next slide. The third framework area is economic development, which means a community that can participate fully in the economy. Some examples of current efforts in this space is the work from the Broomfield Workforce Center. Broomfield participates in the federally funded National Public Workforce Development Program, and we provide accessible services to residents, including immigrants who have their work authorization. These services include resources and support for job searches, skill training, job referrals, placements, and career advancement. Next slide. Under the economic development umbrella, we also work with local businesses to encourage utilization of diverse hiring practices, including the outreach and inclusion of minority and non-native business owners in business events and training programs. And staff will be including inclusive business participation and outreach as a goal and reporting metric in the 2025 Broomfield Area Chamber of Commerce agreement. Next slide. The fourth area is education, and to be welcoming in this area, it's defined as providing students, including immigrant students, the support needed to thrive in school and the knowledge they need to succeed in the workforce. As mentioned on the last slide, the Broomfield Workforce Center can support immigrants with work authorization status and meet eligibility requirements with skill development through education programs to obtain industry recognized skills and credentials, ultimately leading to employment. Next slide. We also wanted to talk specifically about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and I'm not going to try to say they have a WIOA, I think is how you say the acronym. Health and Human Services keeps us on our toes with those. But it provides services for eligible youth age 16 to 24 who fall within specific eligibility criteria. If included in this program, support would include educational assistance, skill building and employment readiness, and then access to tutoring, in internships and mentoring. And then we also have a program for local adult education to provide English language acquisition and high school diploma equivalencies for youth 17 or older. Next slide. All right, fifth area is equitable access, which is ensuring local services are accessible to all residents, including immigrants. Some examples in this space include Broomfield's Public Health and the Department of Health and Human Services Connected Community of Practice. This is a network of 67 partners that coordinate care and services for individuals and families. Our library offers free one-on-one English language learners and technology tutoring. This has been used significantly with more than 475 sessions this year. Our language line service, which I mentioned earlier, is also used often. It's been used 1,924 times already from November 2023 to October 2024. Next slide. All right, on to number 6, government and community leadership. Welcoming communities have the infrastructure and support to support immigrant participation, inclusion, and equity. The Broomfield Public Health and Environment has developed a 5-year health equity plan, which was approved by the Broomfield Board of Health in 2023. This plan focuses on breaking down the barriers to truly improve the health status in historically marginalized populations. Examples include increasing staff capacity to understand health inequities and address them, which includes a lot of training and continuing education. It includes implementing a deep community engagement process to involve historically marginalized communities and identifying the issues and including them in the decision-making. Migrant populations are typically more burdened by health inequities, and therefore they are a key population we seek to engage in this plan. Next slide. Next slide. The final framework area is safe communities, which means welcoming communities prioritize safety for all residents, including immigrants. Everybody at Broomfield, everybody that works at Broomfield is committed and is a part of creating a safe community. As part of this commitment, starting 3 or 4 years ago, all Broomfield employees are required to complete an equity training, which includes the Broomfield Police Department. In addition to this required training that all of our employees do, Broomfield Police Department has also implemented several programs to minimize discrimination and to build strong relationships with our immigrant residents. Some examples include the mandatory implicit bias training, mandatory procedural justice training for all employees. And just recently, we held community listening sessions, with the last one just being at the end of October, to provide opportunities for individuals to come and learn about PD, to build those relationships, create that safe space, and then give feedback for future services. Next slide. So based off of that, if the council directs staff to seek the official certified welcoming certification, the city and county of Broomfield would need to take some steps which are consistent with what I outlined earlier in the presentation. So I'll just summarize those quickly. The first would be to develop and conduct a landscape analysis. Then we would complete the application, including the demographic information from the analysis, an intake form, a self-assessment, and pay the $12,000 application fee. Once submitted, Welcoming America would review the application and the supplemental materials. They would conduct a site visit, and then they would provide us with an audit and detailed final report. Depending on the findings, we would either receive certification or we would receive action items to resolve before certification could happen. Next slide. Staff anticipates that this initial process would take 1 to 3 years and require additional staffing to focus on the initial collection of information, communications with the certifying body, recertification, and more. I recognize that a time frame of 1 to 3 may seem like a large span, but the reason is there's several variables with this application process, including what STAR designation we were to apply for, and then the staffing needed to hire to get on board and then to apply. Next slide. Adding this effort to the existing workload would include a reallocation or prioritization of the budget by council, as the money for this initiative was not included in the 2025 budget. Next slide. So given the current fiscal constraints and the fiscal needs for this effort not being in the 2025 approved budget, staff has identified some findings for council's consideration. First, as I started, was the alignment with the community goals. The city is already deeply committed to being a thriving, diverse, safe, and welcoming community, as demonstrated by the ongoing work of various departments and the collaboration with local nonprofits. Broomfield has accomplished a lot in this space in 3 to 4 years, and we will continue these efforts. Financial considerations. Achieving certification typically requires additional resources for staffing, training, and awareness campaigns, estimated to be between $100,000 and $150,000. That would be an annual cost, and we anticipate that would increase depending on if further STAR designation was desired. Broomfield remains committed to building trusting relationships with community partners, which is a large basis for the certification program. Enhancing existing programs and partnerships with local nonprofits could likely have a more substantial impact without incurring the overhead of a certification-related expense. And finally, many components of a welcoming city program, such as inclusive policy, services for immigrants, and community engagement efforts, are already in place in Broomfield, suggesting that the city is already operating in a manner consistent with the goals of the certification. Next slide. So in conclusion, staff is seeking direction from council this evening on whether or not additional action is desired in 2025 related to becoming a certified welcoming city. And that concludes the staff report on this item.
Thank you again, Ms. Brouillard. So Councilmember Henkel, as the requester of this item as part of the 2024 focus session, would you like to speak to this item first?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Ms. Brouillard, for all your presentation and all your work into this. I really want to give a huge shout out to staff. I do know that exactly our Workforce Center, our Department of Health, our Health and Human Services have been wonderful. In fact, other nonprofits in the entire state of Colorado brag about how awesome Broomfield is for our newcomers. We have everything from teaching in English in libraries to including all residents in our boards and commissions. We cannot discriminate against people based on immigration status. Landlords can't do that either. And even though we would likely land on 2 stars out of 5 stars in the certification process, we could work our way towards really engaging on the subject. So in line with staff recommendations, I discussed this individually with those who supported this and would like to just shift gears away from applying for an official certification from the nonprofit to a more ongoing conversation that is responsive to immigrants' needs. And I wanted to personally thank Rick Fernandez from the Broomfield Taxpayer Matters, who agrees that immigration is something that has always happened and will continue to happen. And also many who came to speak on the subject said that we are already a friendly city to immigrants. So let's keep the conversation going. And so this is going to be a great framework to work off of. Many of the items that were listed on, we already do, that it was news to me. So I'm glad that we all learned it and we all are able to communicate about it. I want to encourage the conversation and presentations and communications to be an inclusive place in Broomfield. I did provide some possible next steps in a document to council today. I reached out to other nonprofits who serve the immigrant population, like Broomfield Fish, The Refuge, Marty Dormish from Everyday Epics, and first and second generation immigrants, and came up with some ideas on that document. I'm going to go through them briefly, but I did submit them to council. So if council wants to either support certain things, all of it, or add to it, I think it's a living, breathing document that we could work off of. The first one is just a statement, and this is something that's generally required if you even do the certification, but a statement of immigrant support by city leaders. We could do this for National Refugee Day and June 20th, and it's during National Heritage Month for June. We want to make sure that people know that this home that we call Broomfield is a place that we all feel safe and secure. An equity lens, number 2, holistically, when approaching all subsets of action, ask ourselves, where's the access for newcomers? Culturally, how would this policy or action land on someone who is a newcomer? How are we creating access to services, information, and most importantly, who are we asking to help inform us? Examples of this would be like currently on our agendas, there's no availability for translation on our agendas. There's little access to transportation who don't have licenses. Even our trash hauler notice was only in English, and we could have provided some sort of alternate language services. This minimum wage question, like we talked earlier, affects immigrants disproportionately. How are we enforcing employment laws and supporting local small businesses? I love the language access plan. I'm super excited about that. How will that be shared with the community, and how are we asking for input? That will be a continuous and flowing process. Number 3, community building and learning experiences in connected communities. I just want to know, what are we doing and the plans to expand on this type of community building? Number 4, inclusive data collection includes questions in our next survey of how are we serving or not serving newcomers? What are we doing well? And this could even be people who are in the military. Me and my husband were in the military. And what does that mean that, if we move and we're here as a newcomer, how are we serving new people? How are we connecting people to taking the survey and programs that could assist them, like the business development team? There is a structural approach that Adams 12 School Board did with their Elevate program that I included in this too. 5 through 9, I'm going to go through this really quickly. 5, continuing education for CCOB employees on immigrant rights and needs within the scope of their work. Education for the public. We have new legislation for the immigrant identification document issuance regarding state IDs. How are we getting the message out to our residents on how to get these IDs? A website landing page should be fairly easy to do. Those are for our newcomers. Make sure it's trauma informed and resourceful for Broomfield newcomers, to include local places and nonprofits with legal and financial aid, food, clothing, and mental health resources. Our police department, just good communication that newcomers can report violence towards them or others without fear of discrimination regarding immigration status. Immigrants are particularly vulnerable because they may not speak English, and they could often be part of a domestic violent situation, and they're fearful for their lives in reporting. And then the last part is understand the work authorization process. I know that Mayor Johnston had addressed this earlier, and with 2025, with the possibility of federal administration denying newcomers the ability to work, we could work regionally with the metro area on establishing local pathways to work. Losing work is devastating for families, and they want to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So does any member of council have any questions or comments regarding this item? I just have a quick question for Ms. Rogers. The last item she spoke about the work authorization process. Is there anything a local government can do to intervene in these work status for migrants?
No, work authorization is an entirely a federal law. I think Councilmember Hinkle mentioned what the city and county of Denver was looking into. In the early days of this year, they were looking into potentially challenging that law to say that a local government was an employer. That never went forward. What Denver did was host a program to help job training while people were waiting for their work authorization. And so that when they got that authorization, which can take anywhere from 3 to 9 months, depending, as soon as they got that work authorization, again, from the federal government, then they were ready and prepared to work. But no, we could not authorize someone to work in our community if they do not have federal authorization.
All right, thanks for that clarification. We'll go to Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor. So I went back and looked through my notes on this particular topic. This topic began as DEAI efforts, immigrant and migrant support. I initially supported this topic to be discussed at the focus session as I witnessed, I think as many of council members and many of our community witnessed, the migrant influx to the city of Denver and the resulting large impact this had on the city operations, city organization, as well as on the community of Denver. Prior to the focus session, this was further refined to emergency operation plans, immigrant migrant supports, i.e. if a bus arrives in Broomfield, how are we going to handle that, such as what was going on down in Denver? To discuss the city's approach to supporting immigrants and migrants, focusing on emergency operations and exploring avenues for long-term assistance and integration. That last piece was a further refinement of that initial topic. At the focus session, the presentation ended with an ask to become a first certified welcoming cities framework, which was not a part of that initial conversation. Tonight, after staff's presentation on what was this, a lot of research, I would believe, on the certified welcoming cities certification, I see that Councilmember Henkel has once again changed the focus for this topic, and we're into some more convoluted, future long-term assistance or integration or whatever's coming. So I didn't support moving this forward at the certified welcoming cities at the focus session, and I don't support committing the additional staff and financial resources to continue this conversation tonight. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Marshallson.
Thank you, Mayor. I did support moving this forward. At the focus session, I'm not, and I appreciate Councilmember Hinkle changing up the framework as far as the welcoming city thing. I do think that we are doing a lot of the stuff already. A lot of these things are already being done by our community. So I don't think that the welcoming city certification is a necessary step, especially given the cost that it would bring to the community. So I appreciate that we're not really moving forward with that. I do think that there is some room to do better. There's always room to do better on some things. Communication being the one thing that I think this is always a good thing. I had a resident reach out to me this week on the flyer that went out on the trash flyer, and they mentioned that the fact that they were surprised that it was only in English and not English and Spanish or something like that. So I think there's communication areas where we could improve always, and ensuring that everybody has a voice in our community and knows how to access that voice. I think that's the key. The document that Councilmember Hinkle mentioned, sorry, I didn't have my email open. I do appreciate and support I think most of what's in there. I did have the same question that the mayor asked about the work authorization, because I do know that Denver was talking about using city for, if they hired him in the city, then did not apply. But I understand that would probably likely involve legal challenges and would be a long process. So it's not really worth going forward with from what I understand of the law. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're doing a good job. I think we could always do better. And I do support any steps that we can take to do better that doesn't involve a large amount of costs to our community. So I think that's where I'm at.
Well, I appreciate your comments, but Councilmember Henkel supplied council with a document of 9 items that has not been provided to the public. And all of these collectively are a lot more work and a lift for staff. So when you just say, I support all of them, that is not a vetted answer of, you don't know what it takes. You don't know how much time or investment it's going to take. So you're agreeing to something without knowing what that entails.
Fair point. I think my statement then is more along, I don't have a problem with exploring what these look like if it's something. But yeah, I mean, I've like everyone else have had the document for a few hours, so I couldn't give direction on these right now at this stage. So I guess is my thought.
That's fair and accurate. All right, next, Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to take a moment to give appreciation to Councilmember Henkel for raising the issue. It's not easy. You get slings and arrows, especially in the current environment that's been elevated through a lot of demonization of immigrants and migrants, unfortunately, which solves no problems. I think that's value in what she has presented. There's obviously a lot of, I think, 9 items that I think we need review, and maybe that's something that our DEIA people could look at and come back to us and say, this is a cadence we could address these and at what point in time, not all at once, obviously, but I think the value is making them front and center, that this is important to us as an organization, as a city, as a community, that these are values that are important. Minorities often get overlooked and they feel that. So it's important to make sure everyone feels welcomed in this community, whether whatever their status, whatever their identity is, it's important to our community. I wanted to note that in terms of the things that she's raised, our public schools already do this. They already have to welcome everybody. This is not something they have a choice on at all. This is already happening in a number of communities. The already welcoming cities in the state include Gunnison. I think there's a certification in Fort Morgan, as well as Aurora. So as you know, I work for UC Health. Across the street from me is University of Colorado Hospital. They have 80 to 100 interpreters online on call to be available because patients come under, whether it's a different language, whether it's loss of hearing, some other disability. And they do that so they can provide their service, but also to make sure they feel welcomed and they can treat them. And it's just basic humanity and from my perspective. So obviously we haven't had time to really absorb everything. I think it's a reasonable shift that Councilmember Henkel has suggested, that we take our time and figure out what we can and cannot do easily. Some things all at once may seem undoable because there's 9 of them, but once you break it down, you might, as the city presentation is, we're doing already a lot of this. Maybe we haven't formalized it in our policy. Maybe we haven't formalized it in our value statements and mission statement, but there's value to that. So I would say, I mean, we have a DEIA office. I think maybe they're the first step to review it. I'm sure the city manager may have a different suggestion, but I think there isn't something we need to rush into, but I think we could adopt recommendations to come back to us and recommend how best to go forward to address some of these questions.
You have anything to add to that, Manager Hoffman, on the practicality?
Two things. I think the research that was done to inform what Ms. Brouillard presented was lengthy, detailed, and helpful for us to be able to collectively in one place inventory all of the efforts and work that we've been doing. Those 9 items aren't in at first blush. All 9 of those items are incorporated from a value perspective and what we've been doing over the last 4 years. The initiatives themselves will require additional time and staffing. So I want clear direction, if at all possible, from council on which one of the 9. Because I can see me taking those 9 to our team and saying less about what your opinion is, more about cross-checking and what additional action items need to be taken in 2025. Capacity is always,
I know.
we are we are packed in 2025.
Should we have some consideration for the fact that the public doesn't have access to this document? And we're discussing things that aren't, it's not transparent. So we have to make this transparent. We can't discuss a document that only council has seen. It's not fair.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so should we put this out there? I mean, the topic we were going to discuss tonight was Councilmember Henkel's original proposal of, do we want to become a welcoming city with that designation? This is a complete departure because it's not what our staff researched. It's not what was noticed to the public. These are things that are in addition to the request. So in all fairness, I feel like this is a new topic because of the length of this document, because of the detail, and because it is 9 items that were not part of the original presentation.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll continue the conversation, but I just wanted the public to know that that's what's going on and that I don't feel like it should be decided upon tonight because it hasn't been properly noticed. And that's not inclusive.
So, so just for clarification on the end from direction, what I'm hearing is that until or unless there's additional conversation on whether it be 1 or 9 of those items, maybe perhaps a section 18 where council can say 2 of the items, 1 of the items, none of the items, leaving the study session at this point, and unless there's additional direction from council, I will default to, there's not going to be additional specific effort on those items.
We'll see how the conversation goes, but that's my take on it. And that's how I feel. I think this is beyond what the original conversation was going to be. And we've already expended staff resources exploring and going down that path of a welcoming city and what we're doing and what we're not. These are separate and additional. All right, so I'll go in order. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. With all that in mind, I hope this does provide some specific guidance. In my view, the most important thing is ensuring all communication from CCOB is translated into Spanish or that is accessible in some way. I think that's something we already do a very good job with language services, and I think that is just an extension of that. And then the other item, I think it is appropriate to recognize National Refugee Day on June 20th. Those are the 2 things from this document that I thought would be very tangible and impactful, and also kind of that first step. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I will keep this quite brief. I actually was not one of the council members who supported moving forward with this, but this has been very informative. I actually did not realize just how much our staff has already been doing throughout all the departments. It really shows all the work that's been done, and we should be incredibly proud and grateful for the work that we've done. I think if you read through this document, and I'm sure staff is reading through the document, there are probably little pieces that staff may very well pick up and say, hey, we can actually do this, we can incorporate this, but I do not want to direct any additional work to be done in this area. I just keep focusing on the upcoming agenda items, and if it naturally fits in, that's great. And we can 1 by 1 potentially bring little pieces forward, but I don't support moving forward with this at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lim.
I appreciate the effort that staff has gone in, put into the welcoming city research. And I would also like to see this come forward in a more transparent way where where this was noticed to the public. So I appreciate the idea that it would come forward as a Section 18 request so that there could be better research before we're making recommendations about these. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lynn. Councilmembers, any other? Councilmember Leslie? You have no input? Councilmember Ward?
Thank you, Mayor. Apologies for being late. I had work until 6:15. I think the only thing I will add is, I'll just say ditto to what Councilmember Delgadillo said. I think the first one, statement of National Refugee Day, is fine with me, but the rest, given the late notice, I really have not had time to thoroughly dive through the document. And so I can't support moving forward with any of the other ones at this present time because of the late notification.
All right, thank you very much. And Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate the input of fellow council members. I realize the idea of migrant services and immigrant services was something that can be put upon in an environment like in Denver. They had to think quickly, they had to move fast. And while I appreciate the initial response on the emergency response, and that's how we dealt with that in March, welcome to immigration. It often changes, it often is malleable, it changes yearly, it changes daily sometimes. This is all a part of it. I am so happy, though, that we are at least having this conversation. This isn't meant as a document to decide upon tonight, but it is meant as just sort of a guiding post of where we could be. And I'm hoping that staff, could take steps in that regard. I would say that number one, the statement of immigrant support, that one is pretty low hanging fruit. And then number two, this is a longer process, and I've realized that because I put it on the document. This will be a continuous and flowing process with an equity lens. And I think that that's something that we already strive to do. But again, we heard on council tonight that there were things that our staff is doing that we didn't even know about. So this is a great opportunity to have that conversation and to move forward with some possible ideas in the future. So I thank you all for the conversation. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Any other council member comments or feedback? So I'm gathering the consensus was not to act on any of this right now. We don't have the majority support to do that until it can be properly noticed and researched if council decides to do that. Is that clear?
Clear, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf.
Thanks, Mayor. So that takes care of this document, but in regards to the certified welcoming cities, so that was staff's presentation. So what is the direction? Are we not moving forward with the certified welcoming cities as well at this point?
That is correct. We are not moving forward with the certified welcoming cities designation.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And thank you, council, for the great conversation. The last item is direction related to the 2025 community survey.
And actually, we're going to ask for two items. So I'm going to step back just a second.
Oh,
Thank
that's
you,
right, the
Mayor.
Focus session, sorry.
No problem. The portion of the presentation that I just completed closes out the staff updates and further direction related to the 2024 focus session action items. It's safe to say we still have a lot of work to do. We have two items that still need follow-up, which will be at the February 18th, 2025 study session. And pending the conversations and the direction provided by council at that time, additional action may be needed before those items are truly completed. With that in mind, and as Manager Hoffman just mentioned earlier, 2025 is packed and capacity is limited. We wanted to make sure we have direction from council on key items to ensure alignment into the new year, starting with if council desires a focus session in 2025. The first item we need direction on is whether or not you want one. And if you do want one, then we would like to get further direction on the format. So for example, if it's a council or staff set agenda, development, location, and dates and times. Thank you, Mayor.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Brouillard. So do we want to have a 2025 focus session? I'll just go down the line. Councilmember Marshallson.
My initial thought is we've always had one. So my initial thought is yes, that it's a good time for us to come together and talk about things that we don't normally have time to talk about, that get pushed aside. So I think I see benefit in it. I understand that we have a lot going on, so I don't, I mean, even if we used it to talk about the charter amendment, future charter amendments, use it as that, like, because that's something that we have pushed off, we did this year, and then we have more to do. Even if we use it as that, as a time where we could basically make it in just a larger study session, on that topic, would be my thought.
Before I go down the line, I wanted to ask Manager Hoffman something. So does staff feel like there would be some benefit for us getting together with the launch of the comprehensive plan update, the financial plan update, the transportation plan update, the strategic plan update? Do you think there would be benefit for us to all come together and spend some time on that?
I think that part of what Ms. Brouillard is seeking from a council direction perspective is there's a difference between strategizing some new stuff and reviewing and doing and or direction with enhancing on what we're already doing. And so generally when it's staff driven, we'll do budget, we'll do review of the key performance indicators. Are we measuring the right thing? Are we counting widgets just to count the widgets? Are we impacting to the degree that we're hoping? That's a different conversation than a focus session of what else needs to have happen. And that's what gives staff pause. So when we're looking at, we're transitioning to internally, we've never done a strategic plan. We have 18 different plans, but we don't have a strategic plan internally. It's an enormous lift for the departments to be doing a strategic plan. The community plan with the comprehensive plan, we're transitioning from our financial system. We're doing the sub-area I-25 plan. There are 5 significant developments that are occurring. So again, if the topics are, where are we financially? Where are we going financially? What's the expectation from council? And then it's not really prioritizing. The conversation will be reallocating. So if there is anything new that is coming, something isn't going to happen. So if that's the conversation, it's certainly one that we can prepare for. And then have a combo between a staff-driven update and council conversation on that update.
That's great. Okay.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Yeah, I think that last year's I think we didn't do a very good job communicating it too, but last year's was basically an extended study session, in my opinion, where all these new ideas that came up that people have been holding for a while. I do like what Manager Hoffman said, like, let's do it as a focus on where we are and where we're going next year type of thing. That's my feedback.
Okay. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ward.
Yes, I would be perfectly fine with a focus session and have it be staff driven and where we are financially, et cetera, that Manager Hoffman just indicated.
All right, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Shah.
Thank you, Mayor. So, so should we have a focus session on new ideas or things we don't normally talk about? No, we did that this last year and no, let's not do that again. But my question is really, does it help staff to have kind of this retreat style meeting or, kind of 1 to 2 days of kind of a council retreat where we're front loading the year with a lot of this information? Does it help staff to do that to make sure the council has that information going into the year? Or kind of what would be the purpose to do kind of a 1 to 2 day long meeting, study session retreat, as opposed to just holding these on Tuesday nights throughout the beginning of the year?
I sure appreciate that question. Councilmember Ward and I had a one-on-one, and we ended the one-on-one today by showing him the 18-foot long whiteboard that has 2025 already scheduled, literally, through the election next year. So part of the answer, Mayor Pro Tem, is from a helpful perspective, I think it's the snapshots. So when we're having financial, particularly the financial sustainability conversations, when we have it throughout the year, it's hard for the community to have that snapshot, to be able to, you really do have to be tracking it. When you have a 2-day retreat, you're able to connect the dots in a transparent way to be able to say, and it's not just a package, but we're able to say, here's where from an economic vitality piece, here's the upcoming developments, here's the development agreements that we're making, here's what we have discovered from a financial impact perspective, here's what the trends are. Mr. Romine always does a great job and with what we're anticipating as we move forward with Interlochen. Everybody's those are items that are, they're tangible, they're relatable, and they're correlative to all of the other council meetings that we have. So I think structure is key. We find it helpful, less about direction, seeking direction, because we do that at every council meeting. And again, it's more for, from a transparency perspective, to have a consolidated annual conversation. The mayor always, she does a great job with, and we're changing the timing for her State of the City. So we do that year-end wrap-up, and this year we're going to do a year-end wrap-up, and here's what's to come. And I think if we time it right with these focus sessions, it can really be kind of a bookend, so that it's not a standalone conversation. One goes into another, goes into another. But if we could have agreement that there isn't anything new on those lists, it certainly helps the mindset for what that format looks like.
I appreciate that answer. Yeah, I think the format to kind of front load this information going in 2025 is probably going to make us a lot of sense, so that we can really utilize that amount of information to see through the rest of those decisions that come in 2025, and to really understand kind of what that cadence is going to look like for the rest of 2025. I think having that staff driven agenda to ensure that we have a full understanding of what's to come. I think that the location, dates, and times, when that conversation happens, I think it's really up to staff to determine how much preparation is needed for that conversation. And I think that that's going to be the determination of the timing for that conversation to happen.
So part of the conversation that we were having today, again, instead of piecemealing it, but looking at it from a comprehensive 2025, we have the community survey, which you all are going to hear about next. And Ms. Brouillard, so I don't have to interrupt you while you're doing the community survey piece, we will be addressing the best way we have 4 languages this year. So I just want to say that before, and what that methodology is in order to do that. But between the State of the City, where we were, where we are, where we're going, and then having that community survey piece, we're thinking that the focus session, really the first part of February, it makes good, I don't want to say it makes good sense, but it's correlative when we look at it from a totality of circumstances of the upcoming conversations. So first part of February, specifically the 6th and 7th.
Really?
That works.
Everybody's checking their calendars, like, do I have any plans? Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Hoffman. I almost said Mayor Pro Tem Lim. Councilmember Lim.
I'm fine with the financial sustainability conversation without new material at the beginning of February. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Anderson.
I am also similar. I am fine with the focus session. I'd be fine having the discussions at the meetings. I do not want to bring forward any new information or any new ideas. Just continue on the long path you already have set forward. And I would just only say I prefer these meetings when they're local. For some of us who have kids, it makes it really, really difficult when it's not nearby. So that's my main feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll send out a poll. Councilmember Leslie?
Yeah, I support such a meeting, particularly aligned with the developing strategic comp plan. As city manager mentioned, I think that the more synergy we have together, the more effective we're going to be as an entire county and city. So yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Henkel?
Thanks. It sounds like there's some new information tonight as far as if we're addressing what the people are going to be inputting into this focus session, instead of it necessarily being, you're saying staff driven, but I'm assuming staff driven means it's community driven based on the survey results. And you're saying we're going to do that in February? I'm confused.
No.
Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity to clarify. The focus session is for, when I talk about the community and transparency, it's so that the collective they, get that snapshot of the same thing that you all will be making decisions based upon through the entire year. That the community wouldn't otherwise, unless they come to every single meeting, wouldn't have the same kind of 30,000 foot. So community won't be driving those items. Or the better way to put it is the categories. So essentially financial, development, opportunities, and threats. Almost like a SWOT analysis for Broomfield.
Okay. So is there any chance to address in a focus session on the results of the survey and what we could address with that, or what would that look like?
Survey won't be, so the survey is anticipated to be coming out, and Ms. Brouillard is, we had a meeting today, but it's been a long day today, so I can't recall immediately when that timing is. I think it's March, Ms. Brouillard, that we will be getting those survey results back and then sharing those with the community in April.
Okay. And there's no plan to address that in a focus session at this time?
The community results?
Correct, in the priorities. I'm wondering if, I feel like we need to have some sort of focus session on what the community wants.
So we're anticipating that the community survey goes out, and that in years past, once that survey goes out, we have an entire study session dedicated to the results, the outcome, and to what degree do you all connect what the community says, and how do you translate into the directions that they want to. How are you doing? What's your grade? Broomfield headed in the right direction, the wrong direction? Why are we headed in the right direction or the wrong direction? What do they want to see? There's open-ended questions this year that there hasn't been in years past. So when we're talking about a focus session, it's less about influencing where we go in 2025 and more about the decisions that have been made over the last 4 years have brought us to this financial state.
Okay.
What are we going to do about it now? So two very different formats and outcomes.
Okay, so it sounds like this focus session is based on like the results and the things that's happening in the past year. And then we will have an opportunity for a study session, which is almost like a focus session, to address the results. So in that case, then I agree.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Cohen?
Is it a tie? Do I get the break one? I don't know, since I'm last.
No, did you want to break a tie?
I would say that the value to me of the focus session is to able to hear from council members to talk to each other and hear perspectives that we can't often do in meetings because we follow very strict rules. And I feel like the study sessions and council meetings are already pretty staff driven. What I'd rather do is have a format where we can hear from fellow council members more You know, for instance, we're all having interviews with the comp plan, on the comp plan separately. 45 minutes, it's like we're being interrogated. The detectives are putting us in separate interview rooms to see if we say the same thing. I won't know what any other council member says, it's probably for quite a while. And it would be nice to have a common discussion on comp plan. It would be nice to have a common discussion on the results of the survey and what the community says to that survey. So it'd be nice to do that at the later point. So preferably it would be more council driven, more opportunity not to have staff presentation, but council to address their concerns, what they'd like to focus on or put what we think needs to be addressed in the year ahead. And that would be my preference.
So it sounds like there is consensus to have the focus session and the majority do think that it could be a good combination of starting with a staff update and where we are. Maybe that is a good idea since we have separate interviews with on the comp plan to kind of report back and give a gauge of where we all landed, like where are we on the same page, or, you know, what were the common themes that came out of our individual discussions? I know why it's individual because it's one-on-one, but it would be kind of cool to see how that all shakes out, if that's possible. Or even practical. I don't know.
Yes, and so nothing precludes council at any point from saying, let's all get together on a Saturday and talk about whether it's the comp plan or anything else. So again, staff will do whatever council directs us to do.
I think we have a good direction to move forward with what you proposed.
And if council decides to do 2 days, perhaps that second day is that conversation.
Yeah.
Whether it be the comp plan or any other item.
Sounds good. Does that sound okay to everybody? Does that help you, Danae? Ms. Brouillard, sorry. Mayor Pro Tem Shaft.
Yeah, I just wanted to get the answers on kind of that third bullet point, which is location. So there was a suggestion by Councilmember Anderson about being local. I would support that. I think doing it local really does help. So I just wanted to echo that suggestion.
Any other feedback on location? Councilmember Lim?
I had a different question. Sorry. The whole idea that council members get together on a Saturday to discuss the comp plan, we're not supposed to discuss council business in a group of 3 or more without it being noticed, is my understanding.
We would have to notice that.
Oh, yeah, I'm not, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No, I'm not saying something.
That's why we don't do it.
Unnoticed.
Okay. Thank you. But what about location? Are you okay with local or remote? Okay, local for Councilmember Lim, Councilmember Marshall.
I like local strictly from a cost perspective because it's so much cheaper. It's so much cheaper to do local than it is to go outside the community. I do feel like there's something that's missed if we're all going, we come together, we go to the meeting, then we all go our separate ways. There's no, I don't know. I guess I'm okay with local, from a cost point, but.
All right, I think that's the trend. Councilmember Delgadillo, did you have an opinion?
As a proud owner, well, temporarily we have 2 cars, very briefly, but usually as a household of 1 car and our second car being an e-bike, it is great if I can get to someplace on an e-bike if needed. So local would be very much appreciated.
All right. Any preference, Councilmember Ward?
Well, I think at this point, it doesn't really matter, but I was hoping we would do a poll first later on, but since we're not doing that, local's fine.
Okay. I'm fine with local.
Don't really-
Anybody opposed to local? All right, we have a winner. Councilmember Hinkle?
Just wanted to say, I don't mind it being local. It's just, I know that we had complaints. I think Chris Hammerschmidt had an issue with the listening session at the Grange because of the flooring. So if we could just make sure we test the acoustics and maybe, I don't know, even have it at our city and county, or sorry, our community center might be best.
Good point. That was a little of an experiment at the Grange, having to transmit. So someplace with good connectivity is also a good idea if we're going to stream it. All right. And then the last question, dates, times, we kind of have a time date, the February 6th, 7th. Can y'all, okay, I see. Let's talk about that.
Is that a Thursday, Friday?
Yeah.
I've always done it on Friday, Saturdays. Yes, that's my question.
Maybe it's a one day.
Maybe it's maybe it isn't the 6th and 7th.
Okay.
So let the folks that actually know
Well, let's do the
that are doing
poll.
this work,
Let's-
we can send out we'll send out a follow-up
Okay.
on 3 different options.
Okay. That sounds like a better plan when everybody's, we
Yeah.
don't have to check our calendars
Yeah.
now. Okay. Then there you have it. And so now our last item is direction related to the 2025 community survey. Ms. Bouillard.
I feel like Manager Hoffman covered most of this, so I will be really brief. And it is timely, as she mentioned, we met with Magellan today, which is the independent research organization that we've hired to conduct the 2025 community survey. The community survey provides residents the opportunity to rate the quality of life in Broomfield, the quality and importance of community amenities, and the community priorities. The feedback helps us better understand how well we are serving our residents. The survey asks a series of questions that have been asked for over the last 20 years. So we have a good baseline and trend to be able to go back and look at how we are doing year over year and establish performance. So the reason we wanted to check in tonight was there has been conversation over the last year related to some specific survey questions on specific topics. Primarily, and do we have, go ahead and go to the next slide, please. One more, just so you can see them on the screen. So some of the questions that had been floating was around if there is a desire to increase to generate revenue via either a sales tax or a mill levy change to support housing, to support transportation. And we recognize that that language will be more expansive to be around multimodal. It's more than just cars on roads, but figuring out what that language would look like, and then to support library services or capital improvements. And so before we put that on the community survey, we just wanted to get a gauge from council on if you wanted us to ask residents if they would support generating and paying to do those things.
All right, thank you, Ms. Bouillard. So council, do we want to include these questions on the survey to gauge community support or not? Councilmember Marshallson.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question on that one. I don't necessarily have a problem with asking the residents if they want to support, if they would support those things. Is it gonna be a straight question like that, or is there able to be nuance in those questions? For example, I've heard from some of the housing group individuals that they've thought about proposing to us a sales tax increase, but excluding groceries, for example, from that sales tax increase. There's been also conversations about the occupational privilege tax that Denver uses and other communities use to fund housing and transportation, things of those natures. So I guess the question, are they gonna be more nuanced than just a straight sales or mill?
It can ask whatever you all want to ask. Those 3 categories are from feedback from council over the last 3 years. So it can read however you want it to read.
I would support those questions, asking the community in the survey of those questions, but with some more nuance in the type of taxes that could possibly be asked for. I will say, just from a personal preference, I don't think that a sales tax ballot measure next year is a good idea, but I'm looking forward to the result of the survey. So
The survey can help guide that, right? Councilmember Cohen?
Mayor, I'll take the opposite stance. I don't think these questions should be on there because they're just too blunt. And they don't get to the issue that's really being asked. What's the housing issue? I would rather And because you ask a sales tax or mill levy, people get distracted immediately to taxes and levies, which are important, but it doesn't get to the thing at the end of the sentence. So I would rather ask questions along the lines of, affordable housing is an issue, obviously. There are a variety of potential solutions. What kind of action would you generally support? Because the nuance, the actual detail, who knows what that would be. What is the issue with transportation? Like you mentioned, you're gonna have to explain multimodal to a lot of people.
Or
What is
local
the issue we're
transit,
trying to
yeah.
fix? There is very little bus service in the city and county of Broomfield. What is your level of support for needing that? And how much what's your degree of support that you would support higher taxes to promote that, or whatever the proposal is? And the same for library services. All the library fans will hit yes automatically, but a lot of people don't know what the library needs are. So I don't think we get very valuable information from the answers to these questions as they're written. To Councilmember Marsh Holston's point, I think we need a lot more context and put the focus on what the problem is and where people put that on their list of priorities.
Well said. Councilmember Henkel?
Thank you, Mayor. I too am not happy about, I don't think we need to necessarily do a sales tax or mill levy. Obviously not a mill levy, because I was one of the ones who said I wanted to refund the money back to the people. So I would say, we also need to know and understand what their issues are with housing. So I don't know how we're addressing individual people's issues with housing, either housing costs or housing access. What does that look like for our residents? Ideas, the people generally come up with some really good ideas around solutions on housing. So I would lean more towards what are some ideas and solution for housing, where are you most stuck with housing? And that would generally give us a better idea. Same with transportation, what kind of access issues are you running into? There's a lot of things that we just don't know unless we hear from other people. And then our public library does a lot of work. We could even utilize it as a way to tell people, as far as like what our library does, because not everyone understands it. It's a whole swath of information. But I will say, maybe that we could hear feedback about our library services. And then they likely might not even know the word capital improvements. I know I wouldn't if I weren't on city council. So I would say the language around capital improvements would be improvements in infrastructure around your area, or let's word it a little bit differently. But our answers aren't always going to be in a sales tax or mill levy anyway. So thanks.
Mayor, may I just clarify on one thing? And thank you for
Absolutely, Ms.
the
Brouillard.
consistent question. So these are not how we would write them in the survey. We would work with the subject matter experts like Catherine line up with the library and we've had those preliminary conversations. We just wanted to get a temperature gauge on if the appetite was there to ask that question to, add another tax or increase mill levies on our residents. And then from there, we would go back and work with Magellan and with the people that work in those spaces to come up with appropriate questions.
And I think a piece of it after having these conversations, these community survey, they're long. So getting information, gleaning kind of the nuanced on the topic of housing. I mean, the topic of housing is it's really a standalone. By the time you get down to these, will you increase the tax? What's your appetite for? And these aren't the questions, by the way. So when these popped up, I thought, these aren't what we looked at today. They're much more nuanced. But they're in between being really nuanced and just getting a gauge. So it's almost like it's a 22-minute survey right now. So the deeper dive you get, you run the likelihood of people either having survey exhaustion and they don't answer at all. And so really the point of a community survey is at that 50,000 foot. How are we doing? Are we headed in the right direction? Of the services that you use, how are those services? What is the, so again, it's a much higher level if we want to dig in to have a separate survey on funding, finance and mechanisms for those three different categories, we can certainly do that. We were anticipating if there was a likelihood, not that you would vote yes in order to increase, whether it's a sales tax or a mill levy or a library district. Really, the bottom line is, if you want more, how are we going to pay for it? So we're either going to readjust the general fund, or you have to add something. So the question really is, are you willing to pay more for additional, an expansion to the library? Are you willing to pay more for, you don't have to call out how you would pay for it, and then you do the deeper dive, just like we did with the library and PD and courts. That was a
Well, transit,
standalone.
because clearly that's what was supported before.
Yes.
People would be willing to contribute for more local transit options because we know we don't have any. Probably the only way we'll get any.
So again, if we want to do a deeper dive on these particular items, to glean specific information, the community survey probably isn't the place to do that.
Right. Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'll keep this short. I think that what Councilmember Cohen said, what City and County Manager Hoffman said, asking what are those, how the community feels about those current service levels, what services they use, what they like about those current services, and what they think needs to be improved about those services. I think that's what we should be capturing in the community survey. Any regard to increasing funding for those services, I think needs to come after that conversation to find out how the community feels about our current service levels first. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
I agree with the Mayor Pro Tem. I think focus on the community. I fear that these questions being put out right now will look as if we're thinking about raising, going to the ballot with all these questions. And I think the answer is going to be no right now. So I think it'd be better to understand first and then ask those questions later. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf in that we should use the community survey really to kind of get a baseline of where the community is with the services that we either do provide or do not provide, and whether they would like more of those. And then we can delve deeper into, housing, if that's something that they want to delve into. What does that look like? How are we going to pay for it? Same with transportation, same with the library, et cetera. So that's my input.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. With the caveat that these are obviously not the questions, I am okay with asking about this, but I realize this is a nuanced discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Lim.
I'm okay with the trying to get the baseline through general questions about our current services and future desires for services. I did have a question. There's been a lot of conversation lately, since we're on the topic of community survey. There's been a lot of conversation about how we try to get diverse perspectives, how close the community survey comes to a statistically accurate survey. Is anything, I'm throwing this out now, but I'm not sure if anything is fresh from your conversation with Magellan that you could bring to that.
Perfect timing. Do you want to take it, Ms. Brouillard?
I can highlight some of those. I think it's a good example of the whole conversation this evening,
Yeah.
where staff is working on many of these things daily and intentionally. So as Manager Hoffman mentioned, we met with the consultant today, and Julie Story, our communications director, is also in the back of the room. And in that meeting, we talked about statistically valid. They explained how that works, how they will do the outreach and the communication for that survey, how on the back end they are verifying addresses and stuff to make sure we don't have duplication and all of those pieces. So that piece is still valid with this contract, and they're intentionally working into that. In regards to outreach and communication and reaching diverse and traditionally, maybe historically marginalized or underserved populations, which we've been talking about for a while this evening, that was a good chunk of our conversation today, is how are we making sure it's translated, as Manager Hoffman mentioned. For sure it will be in the 4 language, which is consistent with what we did in 2023. And I believe it was Spanish, English, Chinese, and Vietnamese or Hmong. I'm looking at.
It was Hmong.
And then, and as Julie just mentioned, and what we talked about earlier, part of that equity group work, right, is we want to be intentional in that. And so Julie and her team is part of that, which is looking at, again, the data behind who's accessing these surveys, and then making sure that we're trying to meet them in a way that they can understand it and that it's accessible. So that will be an intentional part of the conversation that we'll explore as we move forward.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Leslie.
I think city manager said it well, and I just don't think this is the right place to do these. I'm not sure why it was presented to us this way, but I think there are better ways for us to get to these topics, and more subtle ways, as suggested. When you start off a sentence, would you increase your sales tax to do ABC? The answer is going to be no. So I just don't think this is the right way to go.
All right, anyone else? I mean, I think it's worth asking some kind of questions, but I guess there's not really agreement on what kind of questions.
We recommend this. How about
Okay.
we send the questions that we drafted today on each one of these items?
Okay.
They don't look like that. But they're not a hide the shell either, right? So it's not,
Maybe we should do some A/B testing on the questions.
yeah.
Just kidding.
Well, I mean, testing as far as the, really what you're seeking the tolerance. And to what degree does additional education, and that's where a separate survey makes sense. So how about we do this? Let us send the nuanced questions, keeping in mind that in order to have a higher rate of return, and to have it be statistically valid, there are mechanisms that are in place now to ensure that it's statistically valid, with IP addresses and telephone numbers, cell phone numbers. That also allows us from a demographic perspective to, I don't want to say heightened awareness, but have that outreach and engagement, not only in the communities that don't necessarily participate, but throughout the entire community, everyone will have access to the survey, whether it be via computer or your cell phone. Again, the bottom line is there's that litmus test. If it takes longer than 12 minutes to complete the survey, people aren't going to complete the survey. If you don't have it formatted, anytime that you ask, put it in priority. This is Councilmember Lim. This is part of the conversation we had today with Magellan. So it sounds like common sense, but there isn't anything common about it. If you're asking them to rate, you know how you get those surveys and you have to rate, the drop off is significant when you do that versus kind of that 1 through 5. So we're bringing it up to a modern outreach and engagement. So we need to be conscientious of the number of questions and how detailed they are. So when you read those questions about those 3 items, just keep that in mind.
Right. And we have Councilmember Cohen.
I was just going to say, I know you mentioned it in jest, but obviously A/B testing on questions is an excellent idea. Just to make sure people even understand what the question was, because you could waste your time. I was going to ask, I think the response rate last year was pretty low, if I remember, I don't, what we hit. And it's obviously, they've been pretty long in the past.
Yeah.
So I would encourage you, when you talk to Magellan, to look at very short surveys. Not everybody has to get all the same questions to get a scientific sampling and response. I'd rather have more people responding, even if they get a subsection or it's randomly selected that you might get the housing questions, you might get transportation questions, you might get service questions. As long as we have a appropriate sample response, it's legit. We can take that as reflective of the community as a whole. So I think it's something worth considering because, a lot of people, I know I get responses that they look at the survey and they see the percent and they look at it as if it was a vote. And only this many percentage people voted for something when it was just a response from a small subsection of the community. So it's not terribly helpful in that regard. So anything we can do to get as a representative sample as possible. And I don't know if Magellan could advise on that. I know that's been done where you just need give people 3 questions to answer. If you get more people doing that, it's more helpful than a fewer number of people getting through all 50 questions, whatever it is.
Interesting. Well, thank you. Any other council member questions or feedback? Councilmember Henkel?
I feel like in the surveys in the past, there might have been some questions that we felt as a council might be kind of sticky. Either people didn't understand it. I cannot remember if the questions have ever been sent to us beforehand or not. So if this is new information tonight, as far as these questions being sent to us, is that something different now than we've done before? Or have we been able to at least look at the questions? Because sometimes we can tell like, okay, we don't think this will actually make sense to our community. I don't know how you feel about that.
So it's a baseline. So when we look at the baseline questions, they've been asked since 2002. So that it allows us to be able to say, here's the trend. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the sticky questions, but we have 2 new questions that public health had asked about with regards to behavioral health, but all the rest are the same questions that we ask every year. We've asked the tax-related questions before. We haven't asked the housing one, and that has been a pretty big topic of conversation over the last year and a half. So again, what you don't want to do, Councilmember Hinkle, with these community surveys is kind of pick and choose, especially those big community topic driven, because you have a baseline and you want to continue to see where you are and how you rate and what those percentages are.
Okay, but these questions, if they are sent to us, that will be something new that we could look at, correct? Because you said these questions aren't the questions that you guys thought of. And then we can just look at them. And then what would we do with them?
The tax ones.
Right.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're not worded that way, but you're gonna show
Yeah,
them
we'll
to us?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep, you bet.
All right. What would it look like then as a response to that? So like, I trust Councilmember Cohen's response, like on a lot of our communications, he has a really keen eye on that. Are we responding individually on our thoughts on it? How are we leaning into that?
I think if we could do from a council direction on the straw polls, there's some of you that say, yes, let's ask them. There were some that said, no, let's don't do that. Let's keep this as the community survey and not have those tax related questions. And then have a deeper dive on each one of those topics. That would probably be the most helpful for us right now as we finalize that. So if we could just, do we keep it as a community survey with the tax related questions?
Yes.
So if we could have a show of hands of no tax related questions on the community survey.
Yeah, well, they're gonna send it to them send it to us for review. Drafts.
I'm
Unless
confused on
council's
the
already made a
question.
decision that we shouldn't have tax related questions, because then it's a moot point that we
Council
would
didn't
send them.
decide that. It was kind of a mix.
Right. So if we could get direction, if we want to have tax related questions, then we'll send them. But if we want to keep it a straight community survey, we can do follow-up conversations on those individual items.
Councilmember Marshall.
My answer on that is, it's a nuance because I think we should ask the questions, but I think they should be formatted similar to what Councilmember Cohen said at the very beginning, that it needs to be, it can't be would you support a tax? It has to be much more nuanced than that. So I support asking it, but the format is what I'm not sure of
Important.
it. Yeah, so.
That's kind of what I heard. People wanted to see the more nuanced,
Questions.
yeah, the different versions rather
Bet.
than the straight up. I mean, I don't see any harm in asking. I think it would help us decide if we want to move forward.
Mhm. We'll get those out to you.
Okay. Thank you, Manager Hoffman. Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf, sorry.
Thanks, Mayor. So just wanted to talk about communication. So could you just bring those back in a report during council meeting as opposed to putting those out in the by email? That way, the public that is engaged with the community survey and has heard part of this conversation also gets the follow-up of what those tax questions will be. Perfect. Thank you.
Let's do that. That's a great idea. Okay. Any other comments, questions from council? Ms. Brouillard, do you have everything that you need as far as direction? All right, thank you. Well, that concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. Is there any other business to come before the council from my colleagues? Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor. So as some of my colleagues know and staff knows, I've been teaching first grade right now. And with my first graders, we've been talking about gratitude. And so with Thanksgiving coming up around next week, I just wanted to say thank you to our Broomfield community. Thank you to our staff. Thank you, council members and mayor. May you have a wonderful, safe and enjoyable holiday.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And happy Thanksgiving, y'all. Have a good night.